Have you ever heard of Snapchat dysmorphia? Because it's this very real phenomenon with very real consequences, right? It's the idea that you see your face in a filter and you want your face to look like that filtered version, but in real life. And while the term has been used as far back as 2018, I mean, these tools have only grown. And we see no shortage of beauty-specific versions on TikTok blowing up. And actually, a May study from dermatologists at Boston University found just how serious an influence that filters as well as social media in general have. Finding that the more time you spend on social media, the more likely you are to actually want to undergo a cosmetic procedure. But they're pointing to apps like Snapchat and Instagram, and they're noting that the use of filters or like photo editing apps is especially correlated with a respondent's desire to get some kind of work done. And researchers also finding that those who follow celebrities and influencers were also more likely to have this desire. And actually with that, you had Dr. Neelam Vashia, an associate professor of dermatology at BU's medical school, saying, in the past, it was always common for someone who wanted to tweak their appearance to bring in a reference photo of a celebrity. But now when people are able to filter their own face and make it look more beautiful, even the skin tone, angulate the chin, raise the cheekbones, enlarge the eyes. They bring in these images of themselves that have become very realistic to them because it's just a beautified version of their own face. But they're also adding that there was even more interest noted post-COVID, and many people told their doctors that they wanted a procedure that would help their self-esteem. It's important to note that researchers said this doesn't mean that social media is directly responsible for everyone who goes out and seeks injections or surgeries, but someone who is already weighing a treatment in their head is much more likely to clear their calendar after they've been exposed to certain content online. And at this point, you might be thinking, doesn't everyone realize like what we see online, it's fake and filtered? Haven't we been told that ad nauseum? And well, yes, we have, but it turns out that doesn't matter. In fact, we spoke to Renee Engel, a psychology professor at Northwestern University who specifically researches media and body image about all this, and she explained.
Knowing better is not going to protect you from the media imagery you see. It just doesn't work that way. When we compare ourselves to those images, it is lightning fast. It's automatic. Once you start thinking, oh, that's manipulated, that's filtered, it's too late. The damage has already been done. In fact, what it tends to communicate is that you should look more closely, because if someone was filtered, that means maybe they were trying to hide a flaw, or maybe they were trying to look especially beautiful, and you should look, try to figure out what's going on, right? So if anything, it makes you spend more time, more focus on that image.
Right, so these warnings about what we see online, they're not only ineffective, but they can actually make us even more obsessive. Of course, with this, I think it is worth noting, there's nothing wrong with getting work done. You do you, it is your body. If it is safe, it makes you happy, have at it. But I also have to mention that the researchers at BU, they explained that if people start to see these procedures as like cure-alls for bigger problems, or like if they start getting insanely unrealistic ideas about what they should look like, then we're in very concerning territory. And of course, this all comes as cosmetic procedures, especially less invasive work, have become increasingly popular with younger people. The American Society of Plastic Surgeons reporting that between 2019 and 2022, there was a 71% increase in people getting Botox in their 20s. And that increase was also similar to the use of hyaluronic acid fillers, with the uptick also being incredibly staggering when you looked at people 19 and younger, or just big increases again for both Botox and filler in that time period. And of course, the most significant thing about that time was COVID, which caused a big boom in cosmetic surgery for a number of reasons. Masks, remote work, and isolation made it so easy for people to recover in total privacy. And you also have people spending so much time looking at themselves on Zoom that they found things that they wanted to change. So, that definitely helps to explain these major upticks. But the social media aspect is also a major factor, with the American Society of Plastic Surgeons even touching on this issue last year, noting that it goes beyond people seeing filters or influencers and wanting to look like them. It's also because so many of these videos discussing these interventions, they're so fast and quick that they sometimes create misconceptions. They make it seem like instant gratification, which makes it even more appealing. But as Dr. Danielle DeLuca Pytel explained, the transformation that occurs after facial or body surgery, even some injections, is far longer than what you would see on an Instagram reel. So you get a lot of people setting themselves up to be dissatisfied, especially because they don't understand what they're signing up for. You also had Professor Engel explaining how much influencer culture specifically has impacted the trend by normalizing often expensive practices.
There's a real issue with being on social media and feeling like the influencers and the other people you follow are your peers when they're not. We used to think that these kinds of practices were meant for celebrities, for models, like for people whose job it is to look good. But now you see these people and they sort of present themselves as normal, everyday people. And the message is, if they're doing it, maybe I should be too, because we're not so different.
Though one thing social media has made progress on is the issue of transparency, and that especially being the case among Gen Z. Right? Plastic surgery and Botox, these used to be very hush-hush topics. People were reluctant to admit that they had anything done. But now, you go to TikTok and it's like, get ready with me for my nose job. With, for example, one TikToker who chronicled her surgery journey, telling the Washington Post that there just seems to be less judgment associated with these surgeries and more support, more people willing to say, hey, if you want it, go for it. Right? So at the very least, people can feel like, hey, they're being honest about what they're doing. They're not acting acting like it's all natural when it's not, which of course is something that we've seen since forever with celebrity culture. Though you also had the post speaking to another author who said that while transparency is good, we could also end up over-normalizing routines that often enforce harmful beauty standards, with Professor Engel noting how consequential that can be.
I love Gen Z's openness in terms of the way they use it to fight stigma and encourage people to be vulnerable in places where they hurt. I think that's a beautiful thing, but there's a real problem when your openness is making someone else feel vulnerable. So when we normalize facial dissatisfaction, when we normalize fear of aging in these very young populations, you are hurting people when you do that, even if it just feels like bonding.
And that's not the only hurt at stake here. In fact, you had Forbes doing a piece about how all this specifically impacts people with body dysmorphic disorder, which is a condition where people are so concerned with or upset about their physical appearance that it interferes with their daily lives. And it's estimated that BDD patients seek out cosmetic interventions, whether they be surgical or not, 2 to 5 times more than the general population. But there, the outlet also adding these enhancements, they don't make their anxieties go away, and they can often just make them even worse. So it could end up being this big toxic cycle for people who are especially vulnerable. Though of course, like with any problem that you have to discuss, you have to go, okay, well, where do we go from here? And so with that, again, I want to note that this piece is not meant to condemn cosmetic work. As always, I am a big believer of you do you. I just want you to be safe and healthy. But you do have some arguing that dermatologists and other professionals should talk to their patients more about why they're seeking treatment to ensure that there's no unhealthy or concerning motivations. You also had Professor Engel noting that it's really tricky though, because once the genie's out of the bottle, it's hard to put back in. And as far as the situation as a whole, I mean, the genie is very, very far out of the bottle.
I've been studying beauty culture for a long time, and I have yet to see any recent trend that suggests a pulling back on beauty pressures. Instead, what we see is each new thing that gets added to the list of things you have to do to be presentable sticks. So the list gets longer and longer. Once people start accessing these products, it feels like a race. If everyone else is doing it, you feel like you have to do it too, just to stay in the middle, right? Just to stay steady. It's very hard to give that up.
And while that is certainly not an uplifting note to end on, it is at the very least a substantial dose of reality. Where I would really love to end this is I'd love to know your thoughts and experiences with this topic.